Who's that coming down the track? Who's that coming down the track? It's a mean machine in red and black. Mean machine in red and black. Ain't nothing finer in the land. Ain't nothing finer in the land. Them drunk obnoxious Georgia fans. Them drunk obnoxious Georgia fans. Go, go! Go, go!
What's up, y'all? This is John and Mike back for another episode of the Nothing Finer podcast. This week, schedule's kind of weird. That's the reason Caleb is not with us. As you guys are aware, you're getting this on Tuesday, Christmas Eve. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
But yeah, Saturday morning, I get up, my internet's out. Very confused. And turns out fiber internet we had installed 2 weeks ago, when they buried it on Friday afternoon, buried the line, they cut the line.
You're not supposed to do that.
Yeah, not supposed to do that, some would say.
Yeah.
And it got fixed this afternoon around 5 o'clock, so that is why we are here, which is very, very nice. But something else you probably noticed, Mike and I are matching. We're wearing matching pink and purple sweaters. We're not
On
announcing
purpose.
an engagement.
Oh, shit.
Mike
Led me on again.
Mike got some Hard Rock Casino Christmas sweaters, and I don't know how you got them, but you got two and gave me one. So
Yeah, man. So back near Thanksgiving on X or Twitter, the sports book had like I don't know. I guess it was a contest, like, take a screenshot of your bets and, use a hashtag and whatever. So being down in Florida using a Hard Rock Sportsbook, because it is legal down there. The Seminole Nation runs that stuff. I ended up putting in, with both the podcast, Twitter, and my personal one that I don't really use all that often, and they picked both of them. So
hell yeah.
instead of picking two, I'm like, better to share. So shout out the Hard Rock Sportsbook. I'm hoping that, maybe this time next year they'll be with us, or some sportsbook will be with us, so I can make money legally, because I cleaned up this week, dude.
Yeah, I'll be honest, man. I forgot to place any bets this weekend. I told you guys what I was going to do, and I know at least a couple of them hit, and I didn't actually place any of them myself, so I'm not happy about that.
Damn. I mean, I didn't put a ton of money. I mean, more than like I would normally do, because I felt pretty confident about all of them, and all the favorites covered, and it was easy. So, shout out me for doing that. It paid for all of our fun in Jacksonville for the most part, but not all the stuff I spent today.
I will say these sweaters are very good quality to have been
Mhm.
free, and they're very
Yeah.
warm, which
Mhm.
it is currently like 45 and raining at my house, so the warmth is very appreciated.
Yeah, I can't say enough how nice they are. So shout out to Hard Rock Sportsbook for looking out for us.
And shout out Seminole Nation. We're talking about the actual Native Americans and not the football team.
Yeah, the better of the two, some would say, for sure.
For sure. I think everyone would say that, even Florida State fans.
Yeah.
All right, guys. We're going to get into just a general playoff conversation. Because, with what we saw this weekend, pretty much all being blowouts. And Clemson was the closest game as far as like eye test and statistically and score, really. So a lot of people are complaining about it, saying it needs to get fixed. So this conversation is kind of like, how are we going in? What are some good ideas to fix it? And we're going to start off with the committee's mission statement, playoff committee. And verbatim copy and paste from their website, the committee's task will be to select the best teams, rank the teams for inclusion in the playoff, and then assign the teams to the playoff bracket and their game sites.
And not to include FSU, which is wild. I can't believe they actually put that in there.
You saw a different website than I did, but I believe it. So, with that being said, so if that's the committee's mission statement, going back to Florida State, third time they've gotten mentioned in this episode, which we're talking about the playoffs, so that's wild.
Yeah, right.
if that's the case, that makes sense on why Florida State didn't get picked last year, right?
Hmm.
And I know some people are probably still mad about that. But without Jordan Travis, Florida State was not one of the 4 best teams in the country. I don't
Correct.
think that with the team they put on the field in the Orange Bowl, they were one of the 20 best teams in the country.
Even like top half,
And
I would say. Yeah.
most of those guys still play if they make the playoff, or I think even if they get left out of the playoff and Jordan Travis is the quarterback, they probably still play, right? They're playing for their quarterback. But they didn't because they were not one of the best 4 teams in the country after Jordan Travis was out. It makes sense.
Hmm.
So why did they pick the teams that we saw lose this past weekend? Because the committee's mission statement does not say most deserving teams. In my opinion, it should be a combination of the best teams and most deserving teams. And I think this year we got that. I think this year was a good mix of both because you have to go by wins, right? You're not taking out an 11 win core 4 team because the one game they lost it wasn't very close and they didn't have a good schedule. You're not taking out an 11 win team.
Yeah.
You're
And
not
that
doing it.
one and that team they lost to is like probably what a top 3 roster in college football.
Yeah, very easily.
Yeah.
A top 3 roster in college
Yeah.
football. And we're talking about Indiana if you didn't get it there. Um, go to SMU, really. 11
Mhm.
win team. I do not think that you should be able to count conference title losses unless they are a blowout when it comes to playoff conversation now that we're 12 teams.
Right.
Because the way SMU played in the ACC title game, they earned the spot. 11 wins, you lose by 3 points. To me, that signed, sealed, delivered in the play.
Hmm.
Penn State. Now, Penn State did win their game this weekend over SMU, but Penn State, 11 wins, lost their conference title game, which was not as close as the SMU Clemson game, but they still deserve to be in the playoff. Do I
Yeah.
think that they will be in the playoff for that much longer? I don't. But beside the point. And all core 4 teams with a minimum of 10 wins made the playoffs this year. So
Seems fair.
yeah, like, are you telling me? And this is the big argument I've seen. Are you telling me that a 9-3 Alabama team with losses to Vanderbilt 6-6 and Oklahoma 6-6 deserve to be in the playoff over an 11-win Big Ten team?
No.
No. And if we go back to that game against Oklahoma, we go back to that game against Vanderbilt, we go to the game against South Carolina, we go to any of their close games this season, we're overall throughout the season, were they one of the best 12 teams in the country? I don't think so. Ole Miss, you can't lose to Kentucky, and the Florida loss looks a lot better today than it did at the time.
Hmm.
But you can't lose to LSU, you can't lose to Kentucky, and you can't lose to Florida. Ole
Yeah.
Miss,
Bottom line.
yeah, Ole Miss, I think, is one of the best 12 teams in the country. You're not going to put in a 3-loss team over a 1-loss core 4 team.
Hmm.
You can't. I don't think the committee could do it even if Ole Miss, let's say Ole Miss lost to Oregon, Texas, and Georgia, they would probably still make the playoff at that point. They would push
Yeah.
out an SMU or an Indiana at that point.
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely.
But they didn't. They lost to a Kentucky team that wasn't close to making a bowl game. They lost to a Florida team that, at the time, everybody thought sucked. Turns out they are significantly better than we all thought, and that hurt to say.
Yeah.
And then they lost to LSU, who, if we're being honest, LSU, their win record is probably inflated over what it should be.
Hmm.
So I do think the committee got it right this year. The only 9-win team that made the playoff was a conference champion. And The only 9-win team was really the only competitive game of the first round.
Mm-hmm.
So to complain about what we saw this weekend is understandable, for being entirely honest. It 100% is. But what can they do to fix it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, I think I talked about it last week. Connor O'Gara, Saturday Down South, friend of ours, did an interview recently with Gary Stokan, CEO of the Peach Bowl. And Gary said the committee is considering moving to neutral sites for the first round, which uh,
Mm-hmm.
uh, on-campus playoff games is what sold a lot of people, a lot of the apprehensive people in the 12-team playoff, who already feel like they're right as of right now.
Those atmospheres were freaking. I mean, the best part about the whole weekend was just like the pregame leading up to it, just looking around and just kind of feeling all that anticipation. That was incredible. I mean, obviously, I'm happy that we won the SEC championship, but God, that would have been cool to have a fucking home game.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's enhancing an already very important tradition of college football.
Hmm.
And you know, here's probably one of the most realistic of the ideas. So take away the first round buys for conference champions. Just make the best 4 teams get buys.
And more often than not, the conference like at least 2 conference championships are champions are going to be in the top 4 anyway. So you avoid
Yep.
a 9-win Clemson team or an Arizona State team that, 2 weeks before the Big 12 championship, we didn't think we were going to make the Big 12 championship. Like nobody was
Yeah.
talking about making the playoff. So I think that's fair. I think that's probably the best solution is conference champions make it, but the best 4 teams, regardless of conference or whatever, get the buys.
And so my next bullet here, you could argue that this season was at least was half already true.
Yeah.
Because in my opinion, I think Boise State is a top 5 team in the country right now. So, top 5 or 6.
Yeah.
I,
Yeah. They should have got a home game. Yeah.
and so what's your argument there, or general argument, not you specifically? Move
Mhm.
Texas into the 4 seed, Penn State the 3 seed. All right. So that gives Boise State playing SMU. Does that game turn out any differently than that Penn State SMU game does?
Probably not a ton. No.
It just happens on a blue field.
Yeah.
Do and honestly, I think we get the same quality of game with Clemson and Arizona State, except I still think Arizona State wins that game. If Clemson allowed over 300 rushing yards to Texas,
Hmm.
Cam Skattebo is going to have a record-breaking day in that game.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah.
So we almost get identical games by changing up the first round bye seeding. Like I do think that is the most realistic option, and I think moving forward it could be entirely different for how it turns out. But given the teams that are in the playoff this year, I think it ends up generally the same, but with different sites.
Yeah, and just a couple of things to add on to that. Uh, So we go from the past 10 years from having 3 playoff games, so like the 2 semifinals and the championship, to now we're gonna have 11 playoff games altogether. Years past, most of the time the semifinals or even the championship game have been blowouts. They haven't really been super close.
At least
Outside of
one,
last year. Yeah,
at
at
least
least
one of
one.
the
Yeah.
semis every year, pretty much.
Hmm. So we're gonna get duds. I mean, that's not really up for debate. It happens, especially with 18 to 27-year-old kids at this point. But if you go back and look at some of the top tier bowl games from last year, Oregon Liberty and the Fiesta Bowl sucked. Like that, nobody watched that,
I was gonna
right?
say I don't remember anything about that game other than laughing at how bad Oregon beat Liberty.
Yeah, it wasn't even close. It was disgusting. The Orange Bowl, awesome for us as dog fans, but nobody else gave a damn about that game
I
after the
think it
first
was the
5 minutes.
lowest. It had like the lowest viewership of a New Year's Six bowl in a few years.
Hmm. As it should have. But again,
Yeah,
yet again, I made a ton of money off that game. That was fun. Kendall Milton, 2+ touchdowns,
bro,
bank.
that was a solid bet the second half of the season. I don't know how
Yeah.
sportsbooks didn't catch up.
right? And that's how I feel about Notre Dame and Georgia. There's spread, but we'll get into that, later. But we talked about the Orange Bowl, Cotton Bowl, awful to watch between Ohio State and Missouri. That's definitely not a game you're going to go back and watch. But that game kind of sucked, even though it was close. Rose Bowl was a classic between Michigan and Alabama. Peach Bowl was all right. Ole Miss and Penn State.
Both teams were
Okay.
decimated with injuries, and it was
Yeah.
like one explosive play and then 3 yards in a cloud of dust.
Yeah. And so it was whatever. Sugar Bowl was awesome. Washington and Texas, incredible game. The Natty itself was mid between Michigan and Washington, and then the Citrus Bowl, which kind of throw in there because Tennessee was a playoff team this year. That was bad. It was like 35-0. So with all that said, postseason bowls are always pretty hit or miss, especially with elite teams, and like you mentioned, with injuries and again college age kids and some time off between games. Like it's who knows what can actually happen. So there are going to be duds, and there's not really a whole lot you can do to stop that. But my argument is more playoff games, having really an extra weekend of significance in college football is awesome. Like
I agree.
I don't know who's complaining. Who's complaining about that? I've seen a ton of people talking about, oh, 12 teams is too much. Dude, we got an extra weekend during this dead time that we normally have between conference.
Meaningful college
Yeah,
football.
like playoff games, like playoff caliber teams, 10-win teams, in incredible atmospheres, in an otherwise dead time between conference championship games and
The big
like
bowl games.
yeah, like the Pop Tart Bowl or whatever is like the beginning of like decent games, right? So again, even though most of the first round wasn't great, besides Texas and Clemson, which we'll get to in a minute, uh, to say that we shouldn't have a 12-team playoff is stupid. More football is better. I
I
don't get
agree.
it.
I agree. I will say the only people that I have heard really complain too much about the first weekend just existing in general were NFL fans. I heard a lot of like NFL only fans,
Mm.
not only fans of the NFL, but like people that only watch the NFL complaining because they think they own the Saturday before Christmas. And my response
Which
to that is
yeah, they had before, but yeah,
I didn't know there was NFL on the Saturday before Christmas. Like I do not care about Saturday NFL football if there's any sort of meaningful college football on. I could not
exactly.
care less.
Exactly. And for what it's worth, I just saw this has somewhat to do with that. I saw a TikTok with this person from Australia or New Zealand, or they're all the same place, watching like I think it was the Ohio State and Tennessee game, and they're just like amazed with it because European soccer or just soccer in general is there's a lot of parallels between that and college football. So a lot of foreigners like college football, and they're just shocked that it has like 100-piece bands and all that stuff. It's just more exciting. I just like big picture. Just college football is better.
I agree. I agree. All right, let's get into arguably the worst game of the weekend. I don't even think it's much of an argument. Indiana at Notre Dame. This game was not fun. I once again bought into Indiana. I apologize for that.
They ain't playing nobody, Paul.
From now on, if I even next year, I don't care who's coming back to Indiana next year. If I tell you Indiana's going to cover against a legit team, remind me of Ohio State and Notre Dame. Unless they come out and beat Ohio State next year, remind me.
Mm-hmm. I mean, Indiana's best win was probably Michigan, who beat Ohio State.
I was about to say, that's more than Ohio State can say.
That is definitely true. They lost their two best, most difficult games.
But yeah, no, I was once again disappointed buying into their inflated stats. I still do think that up until last night, only allowing 850 rushing yards on the season is absolutely insane. I don't care who you're playing against, because the next team had allowed over 200 yards more. Like it's pretty nuts. But
you're talking about Indiana's defense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like that, I don't care what level of competition you're playing. Allowing 850 total rushing yards on the season is insane.
Mm-hmm.
Couldn't do. I mean, they almost allowed that to Notre Dame. That's kind of beside the point.
Well, a good part of that was on one run too.
Yeah. I'm disappointed the game wasn't competitive because I was really hoping Indiana was going to do something, at least cover the spread, make it interesting. Part of that, as a Georgia fan going to the Sugar Bowl, Notre Dame fans great. I'll be honest, never met a Notre Dame fan I didn't like, including in that game in 2019.
Hmm.
But I think it would be a more fun game if you have Indiana fans that like 3 years ago hadn't witnessed a significant win in a decade.
I think on the broadcast, I mean, they mentioned that that was the first Notre Dame home game that's been on something other than NBC since like 1990, and then I don't know, I lost track of how many times they said Indiana was the a program with the most losses in FBS. Like they said it probably a dozen times,
Yeah, if you were playing a drinking game with that, welcome back from your hangover.
right?
Um, but I will say I've had some Indiana fans in real or Notre Dame fans in real life try to convince me that Notre Dame's passing game was actually good and not just a function of Indiana putting 8 or 9 guys in the box trying to stop the run. I I said it way back in like July. I will trust Riley Leonard when the run game is not there and he has to pass the ball to win a game. It
We
has
will
not
see.
happened once in a
Yeah.
game they've won. It just
Hmm.
hasn't.
We will see against Georgia. That again the spread. This Notre Dame opening as a favorite was hilarious. That's I know that was just a function of them the way they beat Indiana, but I,
And
yeah.
and Carson not being in the game.
Yeah, which they finally said that he got elbow surgery, so he won't throw again till the spring. I think I just saw that right before we got on.
Yeah. But yeah, no, I still don't trust Notre Dame's passing game. I really messed up writing this outline by having Indiana and then not typing out Notre Dame and putting ND because that's the first
Oh,
half of the word Indiana. But yeah, no, I don't trust Notre Dame's passing game, and I don't think you can convince me to trust them until I see it. Now,
Mhm.
if on January 1st I am sitting in the Caesar Superdome and Riley Leonard's got 300 passing yards, I will come on this podcast and publicly apologize and tell everyone that listens that he is a good passer.
Mhm. Just
Until
start the show
then,
cold open.
yeah, like until then, I trust it like I trust a politician or thawed out gas station sushi.
Mhm. You don't. You don't.
Yeah. SMU at Penn State. SMU still had turnover problems. We saw it against Clemson. We saw it against Penn State. Um, I think this is the one game of the weekend where the Southern team was actually affected by the cold.
You don't think Tennessee was? I know they did the whole. We'll get into that, but
No, yeah. So we'll get into what I think happened with Tennessee.
okay.
Um, SMU has been a core four team since July. They've still made the playoffs as many times as Penn State has,
Ooh.
and they finished this season with as many losses as Penn State.
Mhm.
So I've seen a number of Penn State fans on social media saying SMU didn't belong on this field. We're the better team, and it's like same record. They've only been a core four program for 5 months, and they have the same number of playoff games as you. Maybe understand your place in the hierarchy
Mhm.
of college football real quick.
Yeah, it's pretty tone deaf for them because they beat a again a borderline top 10 team, which again something James Franklin does not do a whole lot of. But luckily their defense came to play. Kevin Jennings saw ghosts, all that white around just saw spirits all around. So I mean again SMU deserved to be there, of course. Uh, you know they did. I mean they had what one regular season loss and lost in the conference championship, which you talked about before. But uh, yeah, Penn State will. They'll have a real test next game.
Yeah, no, we'll definitely get into that, but I learned my lesson in conference championship weekend about doubting Boise State, specifically the quarterback, because Maddox Madsen has what I say 3 interceptions through the
I think
entire season and went
I think
6
so.
weeks without throwing one.
It's pretty good. I can't relate.
Yeah. Fun fact: Maddox Madsen threw less interceptions to Oregon than Drew Allen did by two, because he threw zero.
Hmm. Dang.
Um. All right. Clemson at Texas. The one competitive game of the weekend, and Clemson played hard and almost won the game. I will say Sark's complaints about the refs worked because their first penalty in this game was with 8 minutes and 49 seconds left in the game.
Yeah, I think I said something in the group chat like Texas doesn't have a penalty. That's wild. And I think like the very next like snap they get a penalty.
Yeah. Um, and Texas got away with holding on offense, false starts, pass interference, defensive holding, the whole gambit. They got away with everything up until the egregious roughing the passer, where the broadcast tried to say that shouldn't have been a penalty. Eh, eh,
Yeah.
lesser things got called on Georgia against Texas, so maybe let's hold
Hmm.
off there. Let's try and keep one standard. You know,
I mean, we know how the officials are in Austin.
that's true. They just really didn't want to get some of these kids like banned from games again.
Oh, but wait a second. None of them actually did. Isn't that wild?
Oh, that's right. Texas just does whatever they want and don't have to face the consequences of their own actions. Who would have thought?
Clearly, we can't see, the hundreds of people that threw shit on the field. No, we can't. Not with our drones or any of the other stuff that we have in Texas. I thought everything was better there
Yeah.
or bigger
The blind spot for just egregious idiocy is definitely bigger in Texas.
for sure.
Quinn Ewers, mid all day long. The running game is the reason they won, and just a lack of physicality by Clemson. Um, the bad news for Texas: Clemson scored the most points on Texas since Georgia.
Mhm.
Clemson also did it with driving the length of the field and not getting short fields. So the way to score on Texas has been revealed, and Arizona State has, I would say, a top 10 to 15 offensive mind in the country as their head coach.
Yeah.
So I am a little more concerned for Texas after that game with what they allowed Clemson to do, and the fact that you have Kenny Dillingham. Um, we're talking about the guy that took Bo Nix from probably undrafted at Auburn to a Heisman contender at Oregon. That Kenny Dillingham.
And having a decent rookie year in Denver.
Yeah. Yeah, the guy that did that to Bo Nix
Mhm.
is the one game planning against Texas over the that's
What, 10 days?
10
Something like that?
days. Yeah, that hopefully Texas throws some wrinkles in on defense, because if not, let's go Sun Devils.
Yeah. I will say, man, Cade Klubnik, that was the best game that he's played maybe ever.
Yeah.
He played really, really well. He impressed me quite a bit with how he came out because I didn't think he necessarily had that in him against what we thought was really, really good defense. But they they played better than expected. But thank God, I thought Arch Manning took it personally and wanted to cost me my Texas covering the spread by fumbling that 4th and 1 late. I almost died in the middle of the Jacksonville zoo.
um, yeah, it really hurt Clemson for Phil Maffa to be out of that game.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It may have been even closer if he was fully healthy.
Yeah, I do think it's going to be very interesting to try to track injuries through the expanded playoff and see that how that affects teams round to round, because every team that won a game this weekend still had some injuries. Like nobody
Yeah.
got out of this weekend scot free.
I mean,
So
if
with that,
Texas ends up making the national championship, they're going to play in Georgia too, for that matter. Most of these teams playing, except for well, yeah, I guess all of them, 17 games, which is insane for
yeah,
college when they weren't doing more than what 13, 10 years ago.
yeah, it was 14 during the BCS for conference champions,
Mhm.
15
Oh, for,
for
10 for the
14
14.
playoff, and then we've now potentially added two games. unless a team that didn't play in a conference championship wins, which there aren't any left.
No, there's not. No.
Oh, Ohio
Well,
State.
Penn.
Ohio State.
Yep. That's true.
Yeah, because Ohio State didn't play in their conference championship game like Penn State did.
You know why Ohio State didn't play in their championship game?
Oh, was it because they lost to Michigan for the fourth year in a row?
Let me check my notes. Yeah, it is. Holy shit, can you imagine? Anyway,
Speaking of Ohio State, let's go ahead and get into this game. Tennessee at Ohio State. You cannot convince me that Tennessee was affected by the cold. Here's why I say that. Tennessee was affected by the second best running back in the country being out of the game. I think pass protection and running the football go entirely different with Dylan Sampson in the game because, like I said, he is the second best running back in the country. Him not playing is going to affect any team. Just like how we saw Georgia's running game be absolutely nothing without Trevor Etienne. Not saying Etienne's on the level of Dylan Sampson.
Yeah, he's definitely not.
It was still a massive effect to the offense. Tennessee was affected by a pissed off Ohio State team and Tennessee just didn't have the horses to keep up with Ohio State like Georgia did in the Peach Bowl a few years ago.
Right.
Tennessee was affected by Dylan Sampson being out, Squirrel White getting injured in this game, Dante Thornton getting injured in this game, Brew McCoy being injured coming into the game, and then his injured leg getting rolled up in a tackle in the first quarter. With that, most offense in the country being without your RB1 and your wide receivers 1, 2, and 3, no team in the country is going to run with legit competition. And I know Nico didn't have a great day, but he didn't have time. He didn't have anybody to run the ball. He didn't have anybody to catch the ball. He was entirely by himself, and he didn't have an offensive line to protect for him. Nico, is the only reason that Tennessee scored points. So
he earned his NIL with this game.
For the entire season, the question has been out on is Nico good? In this game, he had his CJ Stroud Peach Bowl game. I know a lot of people are going to say, well, he didn't have the numbers. He didn't, almost win. He had 10% of the offensive help.
Right.
Going into that game, Ohio State had their top 2 running backs. They had their top 4 wide receivers. And Nico didn't have any of that. I think if you put 90% of the quarterbacks in the country in Nico's spot in that game, it is significantly worse. Because most quarterbacks, after they're down 21-0 in the first quarter, are not going to say, you know what, I'm going to put myself on the line. And when, Tui Maloau and Jack Sawyer are coming at me, I'm going to try to duck under them and take off down the field to get hit by some other Ohio monster that's trying to take my head off. No, most guys are falling down.
Yeah.
So I don't think Nico's stock dipped whatsoever. Honestly, in my opinion, I think more of him after what he was able to do in that game with no help than I thought of him before the game.
Yeah. I do have a couple things. For one, in the preview when we were making our picks, I mentioned that I thought this would be kind of like the Ohio State that we would get would be similar to what we saw in the Peach Bowl, where they were totally locked in, they were pissed off, and they would, kind of live up to their billing with their roster and, what they paid for it and all that. And that's exactly what they did. And I think you mentioned it earlier too, but I mean, they were pissed off. They were embarrassed about what happened against Michigan, and they turned in I don't really think it's up for debate, like their best performance of the season. They looked like their top 2 roster in college football, and I feel bad for Oregon or Texas or Arizona State, whoever has to play them, going forward if they beat Oregon too. They're looking good.
Yeah.
So I mean, granted, again, they played it in the horseshoe, and that has a lot to do with it. But they played really well. They were focused. It's got to see if they can, play pissed off, playing a revenge game against Oregon in the Rose Bowl, which I'm glad that they're playing each other in the Rose Bowl, to be honest. But um, there's that. Second, and again we talked about this too. Uh, Either result that was going to happen in this game was going to be hilarious.
Yep.
The fact that you had 30 to 40,000 Tennessee fans there talking mad shit the weeks leading up to this game, for them to get 21-0 out the gate uh, was very funny. In Ohio State, the actual stadium itself playing Rocky Top with like 2 minutes left uh, was very funny.
So it was. I will say it was funny. Seth McLaughlin, former Alabama player, sitting
Mhm.
on his knee scooter smoking a cigar after beating Tennessee. Top tier troll.
Yeah.
But this is also trolling coming from a team that committed assault for a flag and where their state's legislature tried to make it a felony to plant a flag on the field.
hmm
So self awareness at an all time low in Ohio State.
Ooh, yeah, they both teams, even before this game, lacked a lot of self-awareness. They have no idea, no,
Yeah.
no idea whatsoever.
And the amount of Ohio State and Tennessee fans that are talking about, I'm going to cheer for anybody that plays against these teams going forward. I don't care. Like, I've seen Tennessee fans say, I don't care if Alabama and Georgia team up to play Ohio State. I'm still cheering for Alabama and Georgia. And Ohio State fans saying they cheer for Michigan against Tennessee because of the way their fans are. And it's like,
Told you so.
uh, yes, we told you so.
Yeah.
You're both awful. Um, but hello, pot, meet kettle. Like,
hmm
you are the same people, just one wears red and black and one wears orange and white,
hmm
and you live 5 hours apart, but you're the same people.
It's wild that it wasn't like lost on them that they really do have a lot in common. I'm shocked.
Opposites attract, not
Yeah.
twins of or clones where one likes meth, moonshine, and family, and you know what I mean by family. Um, and then one lives in the worst state in the United States.
So which one's which?
The world may never know.
Yeah.
All right. Do you have anything else you want to finish up on before we close out of here?
I do want to say Georgia basketball on the verge of being ranked in the top 25 because for some reason they're not yet. I don't get it.
They're in Fox's top 25.
Yeah, but what do they know about college basketball?
What do they
Yep.
know about college? Because they put their best game at noon.
That's excellent point. But Georgia, I think they're the only team in Division One that has top 20 field goal percentage and top 20 defensive field goal percentage. So like they're legit. This is the most complete team they've had since I've been paying attention over the last like 15-ish years that I've paired. So yeah, shout out the dogs are gonna get going on an SEC play here pretty soon. A couple weeks after
Yeah, I think they
but
have one more non-con, and then they start against or at Ole Miss January 4th, I believe, is their first
Mike
conference
Mike
game.
Mike White's alma mater.
Yes, and a team that at one point in the season was ranked in the top 15.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
Um,
they are so much fun to watch, even in these like, no name games that they're playing against Charleston Southern or Buffalo, which that was gross.
it was
Um,
brutal.
yeah, I mean it's awesome, but like feel bad for Buffalo. That doesn't normally happen. But uh sorry, I have a baby screaming outside the door trying to break in. If you can hear that. But yeah, no, that's it. So the time between the end of football season and start of baseball season will not be just a couple months of despair. I think we got something good cooking up in Athens on the hardwood.
So if you expand the AP poll into ranking every team that gets votes, Georgia would be 32nd as of right
What?
now.
There's not 30. one team's better than Georgia right now.
So,
They're not.
in others receiving votes, Maryland with 119, Dayton with 108, Drake 91, St. John's 90, Memphis 65, Michigan 50, Georgia 45.
Yeah, no, that's wild.
In Missouri, who has multiple losses, has 25 points. So,
There's a brief time when we were down in Florida the other day that I thought about putting a future on Georgia basketball to win the SEC. I think it was like plus like 50,000 or something like that.
not a bad bet, depending on how much you put on there.
Yeah, I not gonna put the mortgage, but even if you put like $10, that's a pretty good amount.
Yeah.
It was either 5,000 or 50. It was something ridiculous.
Yeah.
It was fun.
Just a little update on the schedule moving forward. This week is odd because, Christmas being Tuesday and Wednesday. And then on New Year's Eve, I will be leaving for New Orleans, coming back. I'll be back home on the 3rd, so we'll have to work around all of that. But we are working our asses off to get multiple interviews for this next round of playoff games. And honestly, we're not going to post the episodes on specific days like we normally do, like Monday, Thursday, Friday, or Monday, Wednesday, Friday. We're just going to post them the day after we get done with them.
Yeah.
So, just keep a lookout on the feed for everything we got coming up. And yeah, I know we have, who is it? We have an Oregon interview and a Notre Dame interview lined up.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're trying to get a couple more, but that may not work out.
Yeah.
But if you appreciate all the interviews and all the hard work we're putting in, rate and review the show 5 stars, share it with your friends, follow us on social media. And as always, guys, remember there's nothing finer in the land
And a drunk, obnoxious Georgia fan.